KL Publications presents Beyond the Podium by Ryan C. Sanders. The setting. The debate stage was set. Bright lights, cameras, and a tense silence filled the air as the crowd waited. But this wasn't just any ordinary debate. Tonight, new rules applied. The candidates couldn't rely on political affiliations. They weren't representing parties, they were representing people. Ronald Humphreys and Pamela Dallas, names synonymous with the Republican and Democratic values they once embodied, were now asked to approach the conversation as human beings, as leaders with no banners to hide behind. The stakes were high. Whoever won this debate wouldn't just take the presidency, they would preside over all, as the one leader who could unite the divided nation. Both candidates had been censored and seasoned by years in the political spotlight, and both understood the importance of this moment. It wasn't about defeating the other. It was about rising above the chaos and offering real solutions to a country at a crossroads. Ronald Humphreys stood tall, his posture excluding confidence, his voice deep and steady, reflected years of experience in governance. We're here today not as a party members, but as humans who have watched our country change. Sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse, he began. The people want accountability. They want leaders who speak to the core of their needs, not rhetoric crafted by party loyalty. That's why we are forced to ask, what is the real agenda behind Project 25 and Agenda 2030? What are we trying to achieve? At what cost? Pamela Dallas, seated across from him, listened intently before offering her perspective. With a calm demeanor that often belied her fierce determination, she replied, Ronald, I think we can agree that both of these agendas, while painted with noble goals, have hidden layers. You talk about accountability, and I echo that sentiment. Agenda 2030 speaks to a future of sustainability, development, global cooperation, and equality. But behind those aspirations, there are concerns, questions about how much power these global institutions should wield over national sovereignty, how much surveillance we can justify in the name of public safety. We can't ignore that, the crowd murmured. Both candidates had set the tone. This was no longer about Republican or Democrat perspectives. This was about critically evaluating the path forward. Humphreys nodded. Exactly. On the surface, these agendas seem crafted for the greater good, but let's be honest. Project 25 doesn't just simplify the tax code or reinstate immigration policies. It shifts the balance of power toward corporations and the wealthy. It promises efficiency but strips away critical safety nets like Medicaid and SNAP. How do we justify these changes to millions who rely on those systems for basic survival? He paused for the effect. I've seen the damage of overpromising and underdelivering. We're talking about a future where the elites control not only the economy, but also the resources that sustain life, food, water, energy, all at the mercy of a handful of corporations. Pamela Dallas interjected. Ronald, you're right. These decisions aren't made in isolation. They're part of a larger trend toward consolidating control. But we can't paint Agenda 2030 as purely altruistic either. While its goals of eradicating poverty and addressing climate change seem admirable, who holds the reins? How do we ensure that global governance doesn't trample on individual freedoms or national interests? Her voice grew more impassioned. Digital IDs, mass surveillance under the guise of public health, these are legitimate concerns. The pandemic opened the door to unprecedented measures, but we are prepared for the long-term consequences of giving up our personal liberties in the name of global safety? Are we prepared? The debate shifted into high gear as both candidates delved deeper into the nuisance aspects of each agenda. They explored the controversial Project 2025, which proposed reducing corporate tax rates to 18% and simplifying individual tax brackets to benefit the wealthy at the expense of the lower income population. At the same time, Agenda 2030 presented its version of a sustainable future pushing global corporation and digital frameworks that could easily turn into tools of monitoring populations. Ronald Humphreys took the offensive. Kamala, you've seen how this plays out. Project 2025 is designed to gut healthcare for the marginalized with its repeal of the Affordable Care Act and reduced funding for Medicaid. But it's also pushing us toward a future where large corporations will dictate who gets resources and who doesn't. How can we pretend this benefits the working class at all? Maybe that's why we have immigrants migrating here to our cities, eating the dogs and eating the cats. Pamela Dallas leaned forward, challenging him with a small chuckle. Please, let's stay focused. You're not wrong, Ronald. Project 2025 shifts the balance in favor of the elite. But let's not pretend that Agenda 2030 doesn't have its own problems. You want to talk about control? Let's talk about the potential for global bodies to impose digital tracking, limiting our freedoms of movement, and deciding who has the access to basic services based on compliance with global rules. The conversation moved to the topic of immigration, a flashpoint in both agendas. Humphrey spoke with authority. Project 2025 promises a return to stricter borders, the elimination of birthright citizenship, and the Remain in Mexico policy might sound harsh, but it's about protecting national security. Our economy cannot support unchecked immigration. Dallas countered, that kind of thinking is exactly why we're here today. Talking as humans, not politicians. What happens to the compassion? Refugees are fleeing war-torn cities. They don't want handouts. They want a chance to rebuild their lives. Doesn't strict borders control make us safer? Or does it simply create a fortress where the wealthy thrive and the rest of the world suffers outside the walls? As the debate unfolded, it became clear that the conversation was no longer about winning. It was about crafting a vision of the future that would benefit everyone. Both candidates found common ground, expressing the need to move away from corporate dominance, global overreach, and unchecked surveillance. They explored the possibility of reforming both Agenda 2025 and Agenda 2030, drawing the best aspects of each while rejecting the ones that would ultimately harm the populace. Humphrey spoke passionately. We can't ignore the power structures at play. The elites are pushing for control, whether through corporate monopolies or global governance. But the real answer lies in empowering the people. We need to find ways to uplift our communities without sacrificing our freedoms to the overreaching systems. Dallas, visibly moved, responded, I couldn't agree more. The future shouldn't be about consolidation of power. It should be about collaboration, true collaboration, where local voices are heard, where we trust communities to manage their own resources and destinies. We can't give in to fear, whether it's of immigrants or global surveillance. What we need is trust, accountability, and willingness to lead with compassion. The debate came to a close, not with a victor, but with a newfound respect between the two. Both Humphreys and Dallas had recognized the flaws in the system they were once sworn to defend. They had engaged not as politicians, but as human beings who understood that the country, indeed the world, was at a tipping point. No one party, no single ideology could solve the problems ahead. As they shook hands in the final moment of the debate, Dallas looked out at the audience and said, the answer doesn't lie in agendas crafted by the elite or policies that only benefit a few. The answer lies in us all. We decide the future, not Project 2025, not Agenda 2030, but the people who have the power to hold their leaders accountable. Humphrey smiled and added, damn the agenda. It's time we build something that works for everyone. And with that, the stage was set, not for a president who would rule over divided parties, but for a leader who understood the real progress comes from unity, compassion, and the will to rise above agendas. Thank you for listening. Please subscribe.